UFC fighters who had multiple title shots but failed. Over the course of the UFC, there has been a lot of fighters who have gotten 2, 3, and even 4 title shots, but were not able to capitalize and become champions. Some of these fighters were still amazing fighters. They just couldn't get it done, man. So that's what I want to discuss on here today. A total of 12 fighters. Let's get right into it, starting off with Dustin Poirier. Now, Dustin Poirier, I would argue, is the best UFC fighter to never win an undisputed title. He has won an interim title versus Max Holloway, but he's had 3 title shots, and man, you got to feel for Dustin. This guy has faced the 3 best grapplers in the history of the lightweight division in Khabib, Oliveira, and Islam, and he was submitted in all 3 of his title fights, which is quite crazy if you think about it. 3 title fights, 3 submission losses. His UFC record outside of title fights is 22-5, so you can 100% say that all of Poirier's title shots were deserved. You know, he beat guys on the come up, so many former champions. He beat Eddie Alvarez. He beat Max Holloway. Who else did he beat? He beat guys like Jim Miller, you know, Bobby Green. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, Dustin Poirier has a lot of wins over a lot of good guys. He actually has 2 wins over Max Holloway, a win over Justin Gaethje, you know, a win and a half over Eddie Alvarez, you know. So yeah, Dustin Poirier, in my opinion, the best fighter to never win a belt. But it's just unfortunate, man. Whenever he got to the big leagues, as they call it, he had 3 title shots and he just couldn't capitalize. But Dustin Poirier, one of my favorite fighters ever. Man, if only Dustin Poirier could have pulled that gilly on Khabib, what world would we be living in today if he tapped out Khabib right in front of his dad and became the UFC lightweight champion? Could you imagine, boys? But yeah, Dustin Poirier definitely was going to start off this list. Let's get on to the next one, Colby Covington. Now, Colby Covington notoriously has gotten 2 undeserved title shots. His only deserved title shot, in my opinion, was the first one against Usman. You could argue the second one, but the one against Leon was just an abomination. But Colby, as much as he talks, could never grab that title, man. 3 title fights. Outside of UFC title fights, he's 12-3, but he lost to Leon at UFC 296 by decision. He lost to Usman in a close fight, even dropping Usman in one of the rounds by decision in the second fight. And he got TKO'd by Usman in the first fight. The first Usman fight was one of my favorite fights of all time. And there's a lot of people that say if Kamaru Usman didn't exist, Colby Covington would have become the champion. I don't know if I agree with that. You know, you had guys like Bilal Muhammad, you had guys like Tyron Woodley at the top who would have probably stayed at the top hadn't it not been for what's his name, Usman dominating him. But Colby did end up beating Tyron, but he was old. Either way, a lot of people do drag that narrative that Colby would be the champion had it not been for Kamaru, you know, stopping him because he was the second best fighter in the division. And yeah, man, it's unfortunate for Colby that he tried so hard to get the title. This guy was ducking and dodging every contender in the UFC, just waiting for those title shots. And he's done well for himself. In 15 UFC fights, he's gotten 3 title shots. So that title shot to fight ratio is quite insane. That's a title shot every 5 fights. Not many people can say that. So yeah, Colby Covington, you could argue he was the second best welterweight at one time whenever he first fought Usman, but never could capture the title. Let's get on to the next one. We got Alexander Gustafsson. Man, this guy's a light heavyweight legend. People forget, man, he was the first guy to push John Jones to the brink back in 2013. Him and John Jones went to absolute war. A lot of people thought that Gustafsson actually won that fight. I was under the impression that he lost by a close decision, but he's had 3 title shots, 2 against John Jones, 1 against Cormier. Of course, he had the decision loss to Jones back in 2013. Then he had another close fight with Cormier, another very close barn burner, a split decision. The one judge gave it to him. And then he had a TKO loss versus Jones in 2018. I think he was past his prime by this point. This wasn't prime Gustafsson. Either way, man, you want to talk about one of the best fighters to never win a title. His UFC record outside of title fights is 10-5. That doesn't really tell the whole story. He lost a lot of fights towards the end of his career, I would argue past his prime. The second John Jones fight, the Anthony Smith fight, the Fabricio Verdum fight, all of those fights, in my opinion, he was not in his prime. But either way, losses are losses. But man, you want to talk about a guy who was just at the top of light heavyweight for so long. If you could beat Alexander Gustafsson, you were the man outside of John Jones and Daniel Cormier. But yeah, man, it's just unfortunate that Alexander Gustafsson had to be in the same era as Daniel Cormier and John Jones, literally the number 1 and 2 greatest light heavyweights of all time. But yeah, Alexander Gustafsson, he just was a cut below the rest, and he just couldn't get it done, man. So respect to the Mauler, the Swedish GOAT. Let's get on to the next one, Uriah Faber. People forget, man, Uriah Faber had 3 UFC title shots. And yeah, let's talk about him. Versus Cruz, 2 versus Cruz, and 1 versus Barao. And in typical Cruz fashion, of course, he beats Uriah by dominant decision both times. And he got absolutely destroyed by Barao, but Barao was at the top of his game at that time. His UFC record outside of title fights was 11-4. Listen, Uriah Faber was a champion in the WEC. He was actually the first guy to beat Dominic Cruz. He submitted Dominic Cruz back in the day. People forget, man. Uriah Faber has a submission win, a guillotine win over Dominic Cruz in the WEC. But once he got to the UFC, Uriah Faber was getting title shots left and right, like Christmas presents all around him. He just couldn't capitalize. He was a good fighter. He just wasn't good enough to beat Cruz or Barao. So, obviously, he never became UFC champ. And it's unfortunate, man. Imagine Uriah Faber as champ. You know, the best booty chin in UFC history as champion. I mean, guys, could you imagine? This is what GOATs are made of. Uriah Faber as UFC champ. It doesn't get any better than that, boys. I'm joking. The 50-year-old retired skateboarder. He also KO'd Ricky Simone when he was 40 years old. So there's that. Yeah, he had a decorated career. I'd say Uriah Faber is the pioneer of the lighter weight classes. Yeah, he put him on the map, in my opinion. He just couldn't get that UFC belt. Let's get on to the next one, where we have Yoel Romero. The people pay. Yoel Romero, 2 title shots. He's actually had 2 undisputed title shots, and he's had 2 interim title shots. So 4 title shots in total, but only 2 for undisputed. Yes, I know the one against Whitaker wasn't eligible to win the belt, being that he missed weight, but I'm still counting it because if he would have won, he would have been the uncrowned champ. So he had a title shot against Adesanya, lost by decision. A lot of people thought that you could argue he won that fight. He had a title shot against Whitaker, lost by decision. Once again, a lot of people argue he could win that fight. And he also had an interim title fight against Luke Rockhold that he actually won, knocked Luke Rockhold out, but he was ineligible to win the belt because he missed weight. And then he had another interim title shot against Whitaker where he also lost by decision, or it might have been a draw. But either way, man, his UFC record outside of title fights is 9-2. And those 2 fights were interim title fights. So it's like, or one of them was. So it's like Yoel Romero, absolute crazy, dangerous fighter. A guy that hit his peak in his 40s, which is insane for UFC fighters. Most guys hit their peak in between 28 and 32. This guy was 40 years old, straight Cuban lab experiment, scaring Adesanya around the octagon. Adesanya got hit one time by Romero. He didn't want nothing else to do with that power. Bro, Yoel Romero put Adesanya on skates and left him frozen like Elsa. Let's be real. But, yeah, man. Yoel Romero, you could argue he won one of the Whitaker fights. You could argue that he should have been undisputed champ at one point. But he was just barely not doing enough, you know? There was always... Yoel Romero had so many third-round finishes. And it's interesting because he would always wait later in the fight to pull the trigger, it seemed like. Like, he was never a guy that, like, right off the bat, you know, he's going to knock you out. It typically happened in the second or third round, if it did happen. But respect to the soldier of God. His fights always gave me anxiety. I was like, when is this guy going to explode and KO this dude out cold? And that is what happened a lot of the time. So, yeah. Yoel Romero, 2 title shots, 2 interim title shots. Just couldn't capitalize, man. Let's get on to the next one. Chad Money Mendes. People forget, man. Chad Mendes had 3 title shots total. Actually, just 2 undisputed, both versus Jose Aldo. One actually a very close decision. A competitive fight, but Aldo took it. And then the first time he lost to Aldo, he lost by KO. Aldo kneed him in the face, took his undefeated record, and he also had an interim title fight against Conor McGregor, where he took Conor McGregor down and was decently close to landing the guillotine, but Conor scrambled, got to his feet, ended up TKOing him. UFC record outside of title fights is 9-3. Listen, Chad Mendes for a long time was the man at featherweight. If you could beat him, look what happened whenever Volkanovski beat him. He went up and got a title shot. Frankie Edgar beat him at some point, got another title shot against Jose Aldo. It's like if you were the guy that could beat Chad Mendes, you were doing great things. Conor McGregor beat him for the interim belt, went on to beat Jose Aldo as well. So it's like Chad Mendes, definitely one of the, I'd say he is the best fighter at featherweight to never win a belt, 100%. And yeah, his fights were always entertaining. This guy had a killer be killed attitude, never a guy to like try to skate by to a decision. He's coming in there, he's throwing bombs. He also had really solid wrestling. And people forget, man, he fought Eddie Alvarez in BKFC. So there's that. Yeah, shout out to Money Mendes. He just couldn't get that belt, man. Unfortunately, he was in the same era as Aldo. Let's get on to the next one. Justin Gaethje, the highlight. Now, Justin Gaethje has actually fought for an interim belt and had an undisputed title shot 2 times and being submitted in both of them. How crazy of a stat is this, guys? If you take Justin Gaethje and Dustin Poirier and add their title shots together, 0-5 in title fights, all 5 losses by submission. Isn't that insane? Justin was submitted by Charles. Charles sent him flying across the octagon in the first round and locked up a rear naked choke. And then he was literally, like, Khabib was emoting on Justin Gaethje on the ground. I don't know what other way to put it. He's 8-3 outside of his record is 8-3 outside of title fights in the UFC. Who did he beat for the interim belt? Oh yeah, he beat Tony Ferguson for the interim belt. I'm pretty sure at UFC 249. He beat Tony Ferguson, ended up getting a shot against Khabib, got destroyed. Justin Gaethje's one of those guys. He lives up to his name. He's the highlight, but he just never developed a jiu-jitsu game. Like, he had great wrestling, great leg kicks, good striking, but just literally, this guy's got to be a white belt on the mat. He has absolutely no idea what to do once it hits the ground. So, yeah, man, I'd say that's the reason that Justin Gaethje could never secure the belt. Just a lack of ground game, which shows in his 2 submissions. I mean, even somebody like Dustin Poirier, who has a solid ground game, still lost by submission in all 3 of his title fights. It just goes to show that lightweight has had some of the greatest grapplers we've ever seen. And if you go into a title fight with no grappling, you will be exposed of a little fool of a thing, yeah? But yeah, Justin Gaethje, 2 title shots, an interim title shot, just never could capture that belt. Not well-rounded enough, in my opinion. Let's get on to the next one. Joseph Benavidez. Now, Joseph Benavidez, if I'm not mistaken, has the most title shots in UFC history with 4, and he's 0-4 in title fights, which is absolutely insane. Lost to Figueiredo by submission. Not going to lie, his second Figueiredo fight was the closest fight I've ever seen, like, to a, you know what? Like, that fight was, he got absolutely brutalized. I'm pretty sure you can give the first round of that fight a 10-7. In the first Figgy fight, he lost by KO, and the title ended up being vacant because Figgy missed weight. He lost to DJ by KO in the rematch against him, and he lost to DJ originally in the inaugural championship of flyweight. So 0-4 in title fights versus 2 guys. He's lost every way you could in a title fight. He's lost by submission, KO, and decision. Sam, it's tough to beat Joseph Benavidez. Good thing this guy's wife is Megan O'Leary, so he is winning in some way. But just look at his record, man. Outside of UFC title fights, this guy was 15-2. Joseph Benavidez was the man at flyweight. That was not the champion. Like, this guy was the best fighter at flyweights and never won a championship by far. It's not even close. 17 fights outside of title fights, 15 wins. He was so good, man. But when he got to those title fights, Figgy and DJ were just a cut above, or not really a cut above. They were better, and yeah, they finished them, both of them. So shout out to my boy Joe B, one of the best flyweights of all time, and probably second or third for best fighters to never win a UFC belt. Just well-rounded fighter, just wasn't good enough to capitalize in those title fights. So yeah, let's get on to the next one. Kenny Florian, Ken Flo. Kenny Florian actually had 3 title shots. A loss to Aldo by decision, a loss to BJ Penn by submission, and a loss to Sean Sherk by decision. People forget, man, Kenny Florian's an absolute pioneer, dude. This guy fought from, I'm pretty sure he fought from middleweight all the way down to featherweight. So this dude was blowing up and going all the way down to smaller weight divisions. It was interesting. I was checking his Tapology, and this guy has not fought since 2011. Crazy how much time flies. How old would Kenny Florian be in 2011? That would be 14 years ago. So he was 34 years old because he's 48 now. Crazy to think how long it's been since this guy's fought. But unfortunate for Kenny Florian, he was a solid fighter overall. Outside of his title fights, 12-3 record, not bad. But yeah, man, he just wasn't good enough to win that title. Aldo beat him when Aldo was in his absolute prime. He lost to a prime BJ Penn by submission. And he lost to Sean Sherk, which is whatever. Sean Sherk wasn't the best. But BJ Penn and Aldo, absolutely elite fighters. So no shame in losing to them. Yeah, Ken Flo could just never get that title shot. Or he got 3 of them. He never could get that title win. So yeah, 0-3 in title fights. A legend of the lower weight classes. What else is there to say? Let's get on to the next one. Brian Ortega, T-City. I don't know why I put he has 3 title shots. He only got 2 title shots. A loss to Volkanovski and by decision, and a loss to Holloway by TKO. Now, whenever he went into the Holloway fight, I think it was in 2018, he was actually undefeated, coming off some finishes over Frankie Edgar, Clay Guida at one point. He submitted to Cub Swanson. So Brian Ortega was on an absolute run. He was undefeated going into the Max Holloway fight. And man, did Max Holloway put life-changing damage on this guy. Max Holloway was beating up Brian Ortega so bad that he was showing him how to defend strikes in the middle of the round. It was an absolute clinic. And Max Holloway ended up getting a doctor stoppage after round 4 after just battering Brian Ortega pillar to post. It was hard to watch. And yeah, he was kind of close to getting the belt against Volk, man. He had a triangle locked up against Volk that was so close that if Volk didn't have like a Mike Tyson neck build where he's so hard to submit, then Brian Ortega would have hit that triangle on most of the UFC fighters. But Volkanovski, being the stubborn fighter he is, got out of the submission and just beat the crap out of Brian Ortega, for being honest with ourselves. And yeah, man, Brian Ortega, one of the best fighters at featherweight to never win a belt, probably second behind Chad Mendes, you could argue. Just good, but not great. Outside of UFC title fights, he had a record of 8-2. He recently lost against Diego Lopez, but yeah, still a solid fighter. He's getting up there in age, though. He's taking a lot of damage, so maybe Brian Ortega should try his hand at 155, or there's some more interesting fights for him at featherweight. Maybe he could face Movsar Evloev if Movsar doesn't get a title shot, or maybe he could face like Aljamain Sterling. I'd love to see the grappling exchanges in that fight, but yeah, man, Brian Ortega, 2 title shots against 2 featherweight absolute greats, and he just couldn't get it done, and no shame in that. Max and Volk are 2 of the greatest featherweights, so losing to them, what you gonna do, man? He's just in an era that, you know, it's tough to win. Let's get on to the next one. Dan Henderson had 3 title shots, and interesting enough, Dan Henderson had 9-6 record outside of UFC title fights, which is not the best. In 15 UFC fights, he only won 9 fights. But his losses in the title fight, he got a title shot against Bisping when he was 46 years old and ranked number 13 at middleweight at UFC 204. This was 100% because Bisping demanded this fight to get a rematch versus Dan Henderson. And listen to me, guys. Hear me out. If the UFC rules were based on damage whenever he fought Bisping in that rematch, he absolutely would have beat Bisping. He dropped Bisping. He damaged Bisping so much. Look at Bisping's face versus his face in that fight. Can you imagine a world where 46-year-old Dan Henderson won the belt and rode off into the sunset? This guy was so close to beating Bisping at UFC 204. He had a loss to Silva by submission. I mean, it's Anderson Silva. He was in the middle of his title run, so no shame in that. And he lost to Rampage by decision at light heavyweight. So, yeah, he got 2 middleweight title shots and the light heavyweight title shots. Just couldn't get it done, man. But Dan Henderson, an absolute legend. He was a double champ in Strikeforce, if I'm not mistaken, or was it Pride FC? I'm a casual, guys. Let me know in the comments. Was Dan Henderson a double champ at Strikeforce or Pride FC? I'm not 100% sure, but I know he was a middleweight and light heavyweight champ in one of those promotions at one point. Dan Henderson's the man, one of the most legendary right hands ever seen in mixed martial arts. Just a cut under the rest, so he could not get that UFC title, boys, but he was so close. Let's get on to the last one. Chael Sonnen, undefeated, undisputed, 3 title shots. People forget, man, Chael Sonnen 7-4 outside of title fights, but still had 3 title fights in the UFC. That's where your mouth gets you, boys. Say what you want about Chael Sonnen, but this guy is one of the greatest trash talkers in the game, and you don't get 3 title shots with a 7-4 record outside of him without talking a big game. Now, Chael Sonnen obviously should have never got a fight against Jones at light heavyweight. There was just nobody else, so they gave a title shot to Chael. He got absolutely destroyed by Jones in the first round, but had he made it to the second round, he could have won that fight by TKO because John Jones had a broken toe at the end of that first round. Imagine the undefeated, undisputed GOAT, Chael Sonnen, beating John Jones by injury. That would have been one of the biggest flukes in UFC history. Speaking of flukes, his first loss to Anderson Silva. This guy beat Anderson Silva pillar to post for 23.5 minutes. And what happened? He got caught in a triangle and got submitted by Anderson Silva. It was unfortunate. He was so close to becoming the UFC champion. He just needed a minute and a half on top of Anderson Silva, beating him up, finished the fight on top. It would have been a 50-45 domination. And he did end up getting the rematch versus Silva, where he also lost by TKO. It's unfortunate for Chael, man. Chael Sonnen, a solid fighter, kind of a journeyman, though. He definitely got some undeserved title shots. But, you know, in terms of trash talk, this guy's an absolute pioneer. The first guy to really make it big in the UFC, talking a lot of trash. Maybe you could say Tito Ortiz back in the day, but that's just CTE on wheels, let's be real. But yeah, man, this is the UFC fighters who got multiple title shots but couldn't capitalize. Some of them came close, some of them didn't. But either way, I wanted to cap off this list. And it's crazy that Joseph Benavidez has actually gotten 4 title shots, and he just couldn't get it done, man. But either way, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Thank you guys for all the support recently on all the videos. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you're new, guys. I'm out, and peace.